Happy Tuesday, everybody, and welcome to Informer Live. This is one of our pop up interview shows, and I'm so excited today because our special guest is a local jazz man. That's Muneer Nasser, trumpet player, flugelhornist, and we're going to talk to him in a little bit. But first of all, I want to make sure that you know that today's paper is now out. We come out every Thursday. So if it's Thursday, it's Washington Informer Day. The latest issue of the newspaper, we've got a lot of information on there about uh, what the negotiations have been with the Washington Teachers Union. And up there in the upper right-hand corner, left-hand corner on your side, is a picture of jazz keyboardist Matthew Whitaker. He was in town at Blues Alley this past weekend, and I'm so excited to have had a chance to see him. I've been following his career for quite a while. We're going to be talking a little bit more about Blues Alley in a little bit. And guess what? The sun is out. The sun has finally come out, and I think that's because it's my birthday today. So I'm so excited to be here, to be alive, to be blessed, and to have you all with us today for today's show. Let's listen to some music from Muneer, and then we'll have a talk with him about some things he's got going on. That was from Muneer Nasser. The tune we just heard was Nasser's Blues. It's on his CD, A Soldier Story, and it's on his upcoming CD, Blue House Session. And Muneer, welcome to the show today.
Brenda, and happy birthday to you. It's
Thank you
October 3rd. I'm also
yes.
a number 3 person. I was born June 3rd. So we share
Okay.
common numerology. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And yeah, the threes have it, don't we?
Yes.
And so thank you for coming to the show today, to this version of Informal Live. We're going to talk about a lot of different things. Your background in music. You are also an author. You're coming out with a new CD, and there's going to be a CD listening session that is going to take place at Blues Alley on Monday, the 7th of October. But I want to talk a little bit about the music that you bring together. First of all, you and your quintet performed at the 20th anniversary of DC Jazz Fest.
Yes.
Just a month ago. And was that, have you performed at DC Jazz Fest before?
Well, I was scheduled to in 2020, but the pandemic interceded. And so finally I was able to perform there this year. And so I really enjoyed being there.
It was fantastic. I went to the set. The music was great. And I noticed that you bring in so many rhythms and sounds from various cultures around the country, from other countries, other types of music. Tell me how you have molded what I would call your style and approach to jazz.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say jazz in and of itself is a fusion of many different genres and styles. On a jazz bandstand, you're likely to hear swing, blues, Brazilian music, Latin, and I added a little reggae because coming up in New York, which is the melting pot, I heard a little bit of everything, including hip hop. I'm from the generation where hip hop emerged, and I was right there in '79 when Rapper's Delight came out. So my music reflects all those influences of coming up in New York and just being involved in a music that's a fusion of many different styles. And so we try to represent those when we play.
And you also explained in between the numbers that you all were playing at your set at Blues Alley, I'm sorry, at Arena Stage, about the southernness, that
Right.
influence that goes into jazz. And you really did a wonderful explanation about the difference between maybe a sound that might come out of Mississippi versus one that comes out of Memphis. I loved that. Talk about the southernness of jazz.
Well, there's a myth that jazz originated in one central location, that being New Orleans. But the reality of it is, there was jazz all along the Mississippi River. It's a waterway that was well traveled with cargo, with people, especially with musicians jumping on and off steamboats in different places. So you had
Hmm.
music in St. Louis. In fact, the first rag was published 3 months before the Maple Leaf Rag by Scott Joplin. Tom Turpin published a Harlem Rag, and he was born and raised in St. Louis, a formidable pianist. So a lot of this history gets lost because people kind of get lost in focusing on New Orleans being the sole birthplace for jazz. And so we don't pay attention to the music that was going along of Mississippi. And so I try to
Hmm.
represent that. Memphis has its own particular style of blues. Nasser's blues is a reflection of that. So I began this CD with that song for that purpose, to lay that as the foundation, which it is the foundation of jazz. But
I,
Memphis has a particular style. I want to emphasize that. Like if you think of kind of blue, Miles Davis, you think of Oliver
yes,
Nelson, blues in the abstract truth, stolen moments. It's really
yes.
laid back. In Memphis, they played for cotton workers coming off those fields, and music was their healing. So their blues was more for dancing, and partying, because those people were ready to dance and party after those back breaking hours in those hot cotton fields in Arkansas, Mississippi, and Memphis. So we try to reflect that too.
I love that you're able to provide us with this jazz history and the influence coming out of so many different cultural entities, the town, the workers,
Yes,
everything that goes into the music. Let's talk about you and how you got here to DC. You are a graduate of Howard University.
yes. I was going to Shore previously. I was born and raised in New York, which was a great place because I was able to study with Dave Burns. We had a wonderful music program at Hempstead High School. Bud Johnson lived 2 streets over from me, the legendary saxophonist that gave Ben Webster his first lessons. He taught at a workshop right up the street from me at my high school, as did my father in 1982. And we actually did a concert. I still have a program for that, from that concert. So a rich musical environment. Eventually, I moved to North Carolina for 1 year, unfortunately, and so I went to Shore University, and then I transferred to Howard in 1988. And this was a rich musical environment here in DC. All the legends were still here, Shirley Horn and Butch
Yes.
Warren. And so they taught us, and we had a chance to see Keita Betts and talk to them and play with them. And so it was a great environment to come up in.
Real DC jazz
Yes,
folks know those names that you just mentioned, Peter Betts and
yes,
Shirley Horn, of course. But I want to talk about you putting together your group, your quintet that
yes,
performed at DC Jazz Fest, and they're going to be performing with you this coming Monday at Blues Alley. Talk about
yes.
how you assembled your quintet and who those people are.
Well, first I have a young dynamic saxophonist, Mr. Elijah Easton. Great young sax. He's only 27, but he plays like he's 57. He's mature beyond his years in his music. We have Alan Johnson on piano, virtuoso pianist, and he has an affinity for Phineas Newborn, the great genius from Memphis. And so I hear that influence in Alan as well. We have James King on bass, who plays the closest to the style my father played in of anybody I know in this area. That feeling, his stroke, his style, everything reflects that. And of course, John Lampkin III, a dynamic drummer who played with Kenny Garrett, played with Benny Golson, and just has a great feel and swing. And he's a dynamic soloist as well. And so we recorded for the first time in 2017 a Soldier Story, which is a musical companion of the book. And this latest session, Blue House session, represents our evolution over the last 6 years working as a group and recording. And actually, it was done because we had a concert that was canceled. I'll get into that later, but that is the basic personnel that I use.
I'm glad that you referenced Benny Golson. We lost Benny Golson last week.
Yes, what a
Sax
genius.
sax player, a Howard University alumnus as well. There
Yes,
is a prestigious jazz award named after him that comes out of Howard's music department. That award was created by Professor Fred Irby, who is over the jazz program there at
yes.
Howard. And Killer Joe, which is a well known
Wow.
song, um, that was composed by Benny Golson. And I think if people went into his discography, they will see a lot of familiar tunes, but maybe they did not know that the wonderful, legendary NEA jazz master, Benny Golson, did record. So it's wonderful that you were around him as
Yes.
well as you were developing your uh, love of the music that was already in you. We're going to get to that in a little while because we're going to talk more in depth about your father. But how did you determine you were going to play the trumpet and the flugelhorn? Talk about that. I always wonder how musicians move and groove and find themselves the right spot with the right instrument.
Well, first, I want to say, uh, 50 years ago, 1974, my father started taking us out to hear him with Ahmed Jamal, and he had Frank Gant. My father was on bass. Frank Gant was on drum, and he had a young, dynamic, genius percussionist named Azadine Weston, who was the son of Randy Weston. He was
Oh,
24 and he was already a master. He wasn't trying to get it together. It was already together. So I was like, wow, I saw him. He was young, about 24 then. So I realized the possibility of maybe being able to play on that level at a young age. And then my father, few years after that, he took me to see Dizzy Gillespie. And guess who was on stage with Dizzy Gillespie? Dean Weston was on stage at the Village Gate playing with Dizzy Gillespie. And when I saw Dizzy that night, that really kind of solidified my desire to pursue the trumpet after seeing him because it was in a small setting and I wasn't too far from my his autograph. And so that pretty much did it for me. That's the short version anyway. you know, it was trumpet from that point on.
okay. And then for those that are just tuning in, we're talking to Muneer Nasser. Uh, Muneer, with his quintet, are getting ready to roll out a new CD. There will be a listening and performing event this coming Monday, October the 7th at Blues Alley. Two shows at 7 p.m. and then another set at 9:30. And um, let's talk about the new CD, Blue House Session. What is it that you want to try to convey and get across to the listeners with this new CD?
Thank you so much for asking that question because there's a story undergirding this CD. Last year we were supposed to play for Jazz in the Garden, Juneteenth celebration, Jazz in the Garden. It was canceled. I was devastated. We rehearsed, we had the music down, we were raring to go, and it was canceled because of rain, but it never rained. It didn't rain a drop. And so we still got paid. That's the silver lining. So I decided to reinvest that money in doing the set. You saw a clip from that set. I decided
Okay.
to go into Blue House and to record at least one set from that concert so that enthusiasm and energy wouldn't be lost. So it was overcoming an obstacle. I still wanted to play. I still wanted to document this group playing in 2023. So I took the initiative to do that. And that's what this session represents, Blue House Session. It's me taking a canceled concert and putting it back on and sharing it with people. Now, the only thing I regret that we didn't have an audience. I wish I would have had a live audience. But we basically played as if there was a live audience in front of us. And I took that and I
Okay.
transferred that into a CD. That's why it's called Blue House Session.
Okay, listeners and viewers, you can be that live audience at Blues Alley coming up
Yes.
on this coming Monday, uh, October 7th, two shows, 7 o'clock and 9:30. You're going to hear a whole lot of different music, but primarily from the new CD that Muneer just finished talking to us about. And I just want our audience to really understand further about your love and your background in jazz. And it comes from your dad. A lot of it comes from your dad, Jamil.
Yes.
You wrote a book. And I remember when I heard you talking about that you have been working on this book. So I know I think it's beyond a passion project. And the image of your father is right behind you, and we've just put it up on the screen
Yes.
so that those that are viewing can take a look at it. Upright bass, uh, the musical life and legacy of Jamil Nasser. This is what impressed me the most, which when I read about all of the people that your father played with, you alluded to some of them, but then the forward of this biography is from Maestro Ron
Yes.
Carter. That is wonderful. That to me says something about the respect your dad has when a bassists know and praise and respect other bassists.
Yes. And then another thing I want to say, Ron Carter didn't know whether I could write or anything. He basically gave me a blank check on his name to
Wow.
write this book. I want people to know that. You know what I'm saying? He put his reputation, because this book could have been terrible, even though it got a perfect score from Publishers Weekly and was a semi-finalist in a Publishers Weekly contest of 2019. It really made me work harder, the fact that he did that. It was a real push, and it was a mandate for him to say, do well. And I think I did that, if I could humbly say that, at least Publisher Weekly thought I did. And I got a lot of good feedback regarding this. But my father was a storyteller and an educator in addition to being a player. Everybody I speak to about him, they always talk about his storytelling, a griot in the community. So it really would have been a travesty had this book not come out, because just as important as his playing was his reach as an educator. And he was really one about having the correct history. And I just got into a debate with someone over a chapter in this book that deals with Russia and them going behind the Iron Curtain in 1960. Some top Russian scholars doubted the prospect of that happening, and I just had to send them some proof. And this is from
Yeah.
1960. A lot of us want to go back and talk about 1619 and go back to the plantation, but in the course of doing that, we forgot to shore up contemporary history. The history from 1977 is distorted. I'm arguing with them over 1960, not 1860, 1960. And so they're written out of that history. I wrote them back in. They say Benny Goodman was the first one behind the Iron Curtain. That's a crucial, because that played a role in opening up the Soviet Union. Jazz did that. The power of this music did that. And so there were two African American groups, Mitchell and Roth and the New York Jazz Quartet, of which my father was a member, that participated in history in 1959 and 1960. They're written out of everything. Every documentary, every book on the subject has them, except for the one behind me, has them not being there or not having an impact on that history at all. So that's one of the important reasons why I wrote this book as well.
That's great. And tell us again about, first of all, let me acknowledge that because I've been doing a couple of articles and been in some sessions with the folks at the State Department where they are actually talking about how music has been used and how music is used, especially with American artists, in a diplomatic
Yes.
capacity.
Yes.
And they have announced uh, their latest group of artists that are going to go over there, including Denise Graves, opera singer here from
Mm-hmm.
DC,
Wow.
Chuck D, and it's a whole lot of other artists. I happened to be at the press conference for that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that soon because we're going to have Denise Graves on the show with us, but you're absolutely right. So I think it is important that you note that. Talk a little bit about some of the other artists, some of, that your dad played with, some of his recordings, the things, and maybe a couple of, if you have one small story of something that really stood out to you in terms of how your father um, used his talent in collaboration with other artists to put forth something very special and something very unique in terms of this music we call jazz.
I give many examples in the book. One example I could think of, I was just playing a track for a friend of mine, Trevor from London. It's Mulgrew Miller playing with my father and George Coleman. The only reason why I had that to play for him is because my father produced a concert tribute to Red Garland, who died 40 years ago in 1984. It was at the same time as the Cool Jazz Festival. They didn't invite George Coleman. They didn't invite Lou Donaldson. They didn't invite all these great artists. So my father took the initiative with Kobe Narita, the late great Kobe Narita, to produce this 2-day festival, and it was taped and
Wow.
documented. And so he has a legacy as a concert promoter because they were overlooked even in New York after that history. He played with John Coltrane. He started off with BB King in Memphis, came from BB King's band in Nashville and went straight to the center of the jazz world with the great Phineas Newborn. And from there, he recorded with pretty much anybody you could name and played with and recorded with anybody you could name. Thelonious Monk, Hank Mobley, Kenny Durham, Sonny Clark, Lou Donaldson. The list goes on and on. Roy Haynes, Philly Joe Jones. It's like more like who he didn't play with, but in spite of that history, he's been overlooked because he changed his name. He was George Joyner and became Jamil Nasser in New York in the 50s. That wasn't a good decision for him, and I talk about in the book why it wasn't. You know, so just that challenge. Think of Muhammad Ali in the 60s changing his name. He did it in the 50s. So a lot of those musicians were they were boycotted just to make it plain for
Wow.
you. They were overlooked. So I deal with that as well. And there's a lot of guessing going on as far as Muslim musicians and their experiences in the jazz industry. And so we clarify some points on that as well. And he was a humanitarian. It wasn't just about playing bass. He established a jazz emergency fund for musicians that were down on their luck, and it still goes on. So it's not just a celebration of history, a celebration of a great personality on a bandstand. His reach goes beyond that. He helped people like Irene Reed that needed medical care, and I'm going to be playing in New York next week, and I'm going to talk about the jazz free medical program at Inglewood Hospital with oncologist Dr. Forte. Saved many people's lives because they were able to get free medical care and surgeries and dental care. And he helped set that up through the Jazz Foundation. So it's a humanitarian legacy as well.
Well, this is wonderful. And this is what I want to know. Will there be copies of the biography there at Blues Alley in case anybody would
Yes.
like to have one? Great.
Yes.
That's important. Very good.
Because a lot of book publishers don't believe jazz books will sell. So even when you see a jazz book out, they don't put a promotional thrust behind a lot of them. And I talk to a lot of the authors that are going through publishers, and they don't get a lot of support. And
Hmm.
so I'm a self-publisher, so this is the only way I can use the internet and get the word out because this particular history has not been covered. Miles wondered about it 2 years before he died. He said, "I wonder the school those Memphis musicians came out of. That so many of them came out great." He names Phineas Newborn. He names Booker Little. He names George Coleman, who he hired. And he heard that because he was from St. Louis blues, Memphis blues, both written by W.C. Handy because he found rich environments in both places. So now you see that connection between Miles, St. Louis, George Coleman, coming from Memphis. And three of his favorite albums, George Coleman's on them, but when they have documentaries, they don't even mention him. That's another reason why this book is important because a lot of the Memphis musicians, they were overlooked by the press. They weren't overlooked by Miles Davis, but they were overlooked by many of the writers, and they're still overlooked. And so that's
Thank,
another reason why I had to do this book as well.
well, thank you. Thank you so much for telling us that. And when you talked little bit about your dad, you mentioned that he's an educator, and I feel you are too, because you
Thank
just
you.
came out with a lot of knowledge in
Thank
today's
you.
show. And I thank you for that. Once again, folks, we have been talking to Muneer Nasser. Muneer and his quintet are going to have a CD listening session, if you will, on Monday at Blues Alley. It is for the introduction of his latest CD, and that's called Blue House Session. And I
Yes.
hope that you will be there. Please get in touch with Blues Alley to get your tickets. Go to Muneer's website. I think we have that posted up so that you'll get that link. And we will be making this available, this interview available to you several times through our various social media sites. Again, I want to thank you. I'm wearing pink today in recognition of Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Please keep that in mind. There will be a lot of activities going on in recognition of that important health issue. Also, tomorrow will be our regular weekly Let's Talk, hosted by Denise Rolack Barnes, publisher of the Washington Informer. We're going into our 60th year, folks, so please support the Black press. We'll see you tomorrow at 12 noon on Washington Informer TV for the weekly version of Let's Talk. Thank you. And please have a good rest of the day and enjoy a little bit of the sunshine.